Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we are with a few more donation decks with Teysa Karlov Black-White Aristocrats, but with the caveat that all of the cards are Ravnica themed. This deck comes to us from Rinakota, who's been so gracious to support the channel and bring their deck to the front of the queue. They say, "Hi Cursed, hope your week is going well. This deck is for a Ravnica themed deck restriction, play group that I'm doing with some friends. Every card has to be from a Ravnica set or take place on Ravnica, or other thematic links like Teysa Karlov appearing in the alternate art of Flawless Maneuver also count," which is a very, very good card to be picking up. The theme of the deck is to go along with Teysa Karlov's abilities to get some death triggers and make some tokens, hopefully draining the table with extort. There isn't a budget because of the theme being so restrictive, but I still need to make some cuts and was hoping you could help out. Other notable cards that fit the restriction are in the considering section. Can't wait for the video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, and thank you so much for sending the deck. I think it's really fun to have a deck with a, you get a restriction with your friends together, a theme to build around. It can make this a lot more fun. And if you would like to send me a deck with or without a restriction, there is a there's a link in the video description down below where you can send me your own decks. And if you, like Rinakota, want to support the channel to bring your deck list, make it the next video I make, there's a link down there too. And finally, if you'd like to take a look at this deck list itself before or after the video, there is a link in the description for that too. All right, so let's cover a few things. We're going to start by talking about the commander as always. Then before we look at the deck, we're going to talk about some things about, well, I'm not going to call it block constructed, but it's pretty close. Let's say themed constructed, or any form of themed restriction or set restriction. Just some things that we want to keep in mind when we're building with this this kind of restriction in mind. I think I just said the same thing twice. Thoughts to keep in mind when we're deck building with restrictions. All right, so Teysa Karlov is a 4-mana human advisor in black and white, a 2/4 that is a death parharmon. I can never say that one. She basically doubles her death triggers. If a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers another time. And then she says creature tokens you control have vigilance and lifelink, which is really, just gravy. The real thing we like about her is that she doubles our death triggers. She is generally also at a great mana cost, a 4-mana commander, and though she doesn't have card advantage in the traditional sense, she doesn't draw us cards, she does kind of, by doubling our trigger, she makes it as if our abilities are triggering twice, or as if they are 2 cards, worth of triggers, which isn't quite card advantage, but it's pretty close in my book, enough that I like it. Now, I personally don't use Teysa as my aristocrats, commander, though I do recognize she's one of the stronger kinds. And that's because I usually want one of the pieces of the aristocrat combo. As a reminder, I think I'm going to be putting together a big aristocrats guide sometime in the future. And we'll definitely talk about this, but aristocrats pieces are, you have the sacrificer, the sacrifice fodder, and then the blood artist, which is what the ability that triggers from the death. Teysa is actually none of these 3, but an additional 4th thing that, makes the rest of the engine run smoother, right? All of a sudden, your blood artist triggers are triggering twice, which can make it a lot easier to get ahead or win the game. And because of our restriction, this is actually kind of okay, because a lot of our triggers might come from blocking or combat or removal, just regular things that generally we don't think about when we run aristocrats, but because of where we're at, we definitely need it. So with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about block constructed, or let's say restriction constructed. You and a bunch of your friends get together and you say, hey, it'd be really fun to build decks from certain planes or from a certain standard period or, you know, a certain amount of years in Magic, you know. There's a lot of people who like, you know, playing Commander from before certain cards were legal or Commander sets, dedicated Commander sets came out. Some people like having really small commanders, tiny leaders, but I thought that was a scam. I could be wrong about that. But like I like what is it, Oathbreaker and things like that. So when you sit down and you all agree with this, I like to be a little transparent, let's say. I like winning, right? So if we sit around, you, me, and two other friends, and say, let's build some decks out of Ravnica, I'm going to be transparent and say, okay, I'm going to try to win. Here are some things that I would I would keep in mind. And the things I'd want to talk about are things like, okay, you know, with such a small card pool, a lot of our finishers are going to be the same. So we can prepare for those, right? With a small card pool and mana fixing limits, certain abilities are going to be a lot stronger. Definitely destroying artifacts and enchantments, I believe, are going to be some of the strongest things you can do. And even that, a general sense of that time period and those and the cards that are strong in there will make it really easy to, you know, adjust your deck for what you're expecting, right? One of the things that's interesting is that, like, for example, I don't know if you're allowing the Nephilim as options as commanders, or it has to be literally in guilds. I don't think out loud there's very many 3-color or 4-color options, but there's definitely a 5-color option with the final Niv Mizzet, who's 5 colors, and I'm sure there has to be a few others. So like, be aware that you're not stuck in the guilds. There's other options that you could do in Ravnica themed. Where was I getting with that? Right. With certain color combinations, you know what the best cards are going to be. Now, it's up to you if you want to have this thought, because like, it is a bit of metagaming. To me, that's fine. I like winning. I want to play against people who have prepared for the decks and have prepared hate for my cards, because I think it's appropriate. So for example, a really easy one is that I expect, if I see a white deck, I am expecting Smothering Tithe 100% of the time. I am expecting Blind Obedience, which is already in here 100% of the time. And something that is interestingly not here, because it can't be, is Rest in Peace. Rest in Peace, outside of the Aristocrat tech, has to be in here 100% of the time. Now, what's really interesting about that is a card like Rest in Peace almost uniformly defeats our deck, right? There is a lot about extort, and we're going to talk about that. But, you know, there is a legal in this format hate card that belongs in white decks that don't run the same strategy, that hate on several different strategies. Rest in Peace stops white-black, it stops green-black, it stops red-blue with their jumpstart mechanic and a few of their cards that care about cards in their graveyard. I think those are the main ones. I'm sure there's a little over, like, you know, some certain cards that bleed into other colors, but that is a massive, you know, power of that card. So if I'm in any of those strategies, I need to have a way to deal with that. Luckily, in white, we have options such as, where are we? Where's Instance? There we go. Such as Mortify, that can destroy enchantments to stop Rest in Peace. And these are things to think about, right? Another thing to think about is in smaller card pools, the bombs are bombier, if that makes sense. If you've ever played Limited, you kind of know what this is like, that certain cards are just like leagues ahead of other cards due to the fact that, like, you know, there's only so many cards there and balance comes and goes. Especially in Commander, as mentioned before, Smothering Tithe is by far probably the strongest card, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty confident about that, the strongest singular card from the Ravnica sets into a multiplayer format. So Smothering Tithe, if they're playing white, which they should, this is the card that'll put them incredibly far ahead. And there's a few others. There's just a lot of really good cards, but it's important to know the top ones and how to play around them, right? So knowing this entire setup is just really, really important so that we can stay on top of the plan. Okay, so let's take a moment to kind of look at the deck proper. Oh, sorry, was there something else to say? No, we'll come back to that later. Okay, so looking at the deck proper, we have a 109 card deck, so we're already doing cuts, and I do have some additions, so we definitely have some things to think about. And what we're going to do is, because we're very, very limited, we need to kind of acknowledge that we're going to have some not ideal cards, right? It's just the nature of such a card pool, right? We get to play fantastic cards like Dark Confidant. I would say Dark Confidant is probably on that list. If you're there in black, you should expect Dark Confidant. It's just incredibly powerful in this format, so that's an easy one for sure. And for what it's worth, I think your friends are very, very kind to allow both Flawless Maneuver and Deadly Rollick. Considering Rollick is not, I believe Judith is on there, so it's not even in your colors in flavor. But if they're going to allow that, just be aware, they're going to be playing those too, right? If they have access to those cards, they will play it. If they have access to those colors. So, with that in mind, some cards are going to be just stronger than others. And so, how do we cut cards? Well, especially if we're just going to accept the fact that some cards are just not going to be as good and they're just going to be there. So what I would very much so suggest is we would cut the cards that are the clunkiest first. Because the thing is, like, something like Tithe Drinker or Tithe Taker is that, not Tithe Taker, sorry. Syndic of Tithes is they're both like 2/2s for 2 with extort. Are these great cards? No. I'm kind of going to ask you to think about the extort theme a little bit because I think it's the weakest part of the deck. However, they are easy to play. They are blockers. They are attackers. They can be used as death triggers. We're pretty happy with them. It's very rare that you'll have one of these cards in your hand and be unable to play them. However, if we look on the other hand, something like Stormherd, which is a card that represents an incredibly powerful effect that doesn't necessarily win you the game because there are quite a few board clears within the Ravnica sets, namely Supreme Verdict, Merciless Eviction. I believe there's some Convoke ones in white as well, but I think the Convoke one doesn't destroy tokens, so that one might stick around. But otherwise, there is definitely ways to deal with this card. I noticed Massacre Girl is in your deck, and I would expect it in others. So Stormherd isn't like an instant win, but it is an enormous advantage, and most likely, with the lack of options, is going to defeat your opponents, if not answered immediately. However, it's 10 mana. It's 10 mana in a deck with 36 lands, and not really, outside of Mana Rocks, an ability to ramp. And so I don't love that. I get you could cast it off of Bolas' Citadel, but the odds of that are rather low with the lack of, card, like the utility of moving cards to the top of your deck in this deck. So with that in mind, our options are a little low. Let me see. I just noticed we don't have a card here that I would like. I'm just going to put that off to the side. So for me, Stormherd already is an easy cut. Sorry, just writing that card. There we go. So Stormherd is an easy cut. Looking in this kind of sense as well, Parhelion 2, or Parhelion 2, is also another one that I think really easily can be cut. Because Parhelion not only needs 8 mana to be out, you actually also need 4 power on the board. And though we have 27 creatures, there's a lot of token generation out of some of them, that's still not the easiest thing, because once again, board clears, I expect to see board clears. You're playing 1, I could probably say go up to 2 with Merciless Eviction, but they are around. They are very much around, and there are several 4 mana board clears too. They're efficient. So there's a lot of chances of playing Parhelion since you cannot attack the turn it comes down. One of your opponents, responding with a board clear, and all of a sudden you have traded 8 mana for an artifact you cannot crew, which is really, really tough. Even beyond that, the clock on this thing is not as impressive as it sounds. It does attack for 13, which is really, really impressive. But with 3 opponents, it gets tricky. People will have removal for Parhelion. As I said before, artifacts and enchantments are the strongest things generally on Ravnica. So I would say very cleanly, you're able to, like your opponents will have removal for this card. So it feels a little clunky, and without the ability to cheat it into play, tutor it, or otherwise, I don't particularly like it here. So I would toss it. Let's see. Looking at our creatures. All right, Netherborn Fanlax. I really like this idea. I like the transmute cards here because they all function as tutors. But let's see what this tutors, right? This tutors Pontiff of Blight. It tutors Bolas' Citadel, Command the Dreadhorde, and Liliana Dreadhorde General. No, I like that. I think that's fine. If I stop thinking about it as a 6 mana card and instead a 3 mana card, I think it is rather good, and you should be playing it. That is a good number of cards to play. Okay, let's look at a few more outliers that catch my eye, and then we're going to look at 4 drops for Teysa. Something that comes to mind right away is Massacre Girl. Massacre Girl here is a stand-in for another board wipe, and actually, when I think about it like that, because I was going to suggest just replace her with a board wipe so you always destroy everything. But then I'm thinking with the creatures that are most likely flooding the board, this is a board wipe and you get to keep a 4/4. That's not bad at all. Okay, I've immediately changed my mind. Instead, let's pivot into talking about extort. So you're in black-white, you're in Ravnica, you want to play extort. That makes sense. Extort represents a, 3 damage every time you use it. But my main thing is extort requires 2 things. It requires cards and it requires mana. We aren't exactly overflowing with either. And so I want to limit the amount of extort that we have to the best cards. What are the best cards? Well, without a doubt, Blind Obedience that you're playing is the best extort card. It's just so good. But the second best extort card is Pontiff of Blight, a card you're also playing, which gives every other creature you control extort, so that you have the full board to extort for the number that you have. All of a sudden, you no longer need to cast multiple cards to get multiple extort triggers. One extort trigger and, basically paying the rest of your mana in is going to drain quite a bit, hopefully 4 or 5 life from each opponent, and you'll gain 4 or 5 life yourself. And I like that very much. Pontiff of Blight being a 2/7 is also really nice. It is a lot of mana, which I don't particularly love, but all your finishers are basically going to be a lot of mana, and I think that's fine. Cryptghast, of course, is the other extort card. I don't like Cryptghast myself, but in this set, with these restrictions, I think it's rather good. So after that, I need to be a little picky on some of the cards here, right? And what I'm going to do, let's talk about the second reason I want to take out extort before we go on, is that extort doesn't work with our commander. It doesn't do anything with Teysa, right? It does represent reach, but so the way extort works is like this, right? Extort is a form of burn, is the way you have to think about it, where you are pinging or slowly draining your opponents of life. Each individual extort doesn't really matter, but when it's backed up with other triggers, other constant attacks, it kind of adds up that way. Just in the same way, you wouldn't just throw Sulfuric Vortex, a card that deals 2 damage to each player every turn, just into any red deck willy-nilly, because if you're playing like dragons or something, that 2 damage per turn really doesn't matter when you're swinging for like 10 or 20. Likewise, if you're building some kind of combo deck, the 2 damage per turn also doesn't matter. When does it matter? It matters when you are doing a lot of packets of small damage yourself, either with more copies of Sulfuric Vortex effects, or by having a bunch of attackers, or having like some value plays of spells that do big, like medium chunks of damage every now and then. So, likewise, we have to apply that to extort. With extort, we're doing a little damage here and there. If our main goal is to resolve Grave Betrayal and start reanimating your opponent's best creatures, we're not really trying to do little damage here or there, right? If we're trying to likewise command the Dreadhorde, pull all of our opponent's best creatures, likewise, we're not trying to drain them out of the game. And with all of our aristocrats shenanigans, you know, in the same way, we are trying not to, the goal isn't to necessarily drain our opponents right out. Vindictive Vampire being our only Blood Artist, actually, we have Cruel Celebrant, right? Yeah, so we have 2. So we do have some pinging, but the extort doesn't necessarily work as cleanly with Teysa, because we don't get to double it, we don't have the card draw, we don't have the mana. All extort does is let us ping here and there. So I want to trade as many of the extort cards I can for cards that create creatures or tokens, so that our Cruel Celebrant and our Vindictive Vampire, both of them will trigger, because when they trigger, their triggers will be doubled. And I think that's going to be our our cleanest way to win. Now, don't get me wrong, we don't need to get rid of all of them. Like I said, there's a lot of good ones. Kingpin's Pet is rather good because it flies and evasion is very, very strong. And the other ones I've mentioned, Cryptghast, Pontiff of Blight, Blind Obedience are very good. But Basilisk Screecher as a flyer just with 1 power is rather bad. Thrall Parasite with its remove a counter ability is just a little cute and not really ideal. And looking down at, you know, our 1/4 Basilica cards, our Syndic of Tides, our Tithe Drinker, all of these are just really, really not ideal creatures. They're weak, they don't do anything, and they're very neatly, you know, blocked by a number of creatures that the other guilds can make. I'm thinking any guild with green doesn't care about it. Any guild with white probably also doesn't care about it. You know, you're just going to summon these creatures and they're going to go, okay, well, I can block, you know, forever these creatures really, really easily. So those are the ones. There's another one, Knight of Obligation. Sick art, though. I really like the art of this card. A lot of these cards have great art. And so I just like to take them out. We have depth to the Deathless here. And that's going to be a big drain spell. And so though that works with extort as well, I just think the extort is more trouble than it's worth. When we want this ability of extort, we're going to get it from Pontiff of Blight. All right. Now, there's not much else I want to immediately cut. There's a few things here or there. I think Beckon Apparition is one of the weaker cards in the deck. I'll try to suggest something a little better than that to hate on our opponent's graveyards. And yeah. Sky Tether, likewise. Arrest feels just a little too close to unplayable. These are the cards that kind of stand out to me. But the rest I really, really like. Now I'm going to give some suggestions of additions. Some of them are within your list down here. If I've named something twice, it's because I've agreed with you, I guess is what I'm getting at. And though there's a lot of good suggestions here, there's some I want to focus on. And the thing I want to focus on as mainly is we are an Aristocrats deck. There's some good Aristocrats options, and there's a lot of good support cards that I think are worth running. So nice and easy. The first one is God Eternal Bantu. I'm kind of surprised that she's not in here. She feels, to me, she's always been the strongest of the God Eternals because she represents instantaneous card advantage. She works with your token creations. She works with Afterlife. We'll get to that in a second. And she works with, creatures that are just no longer valuable in game. She's also kind of a sacrifice outlet, and like many of the other God Eternals, I think all the God Eternals, if she dies, she is basically put into the top 3 cards of your deck that you can pull her back out again. You also have Oketra, God Eternal Oketra, who has the same ability, and I'm just going to say play both. I think they are some of the strongest creatures, like bombed creatures you can have at that mana cost in this restriction, and I think you should definitely play both of them if you are able to, which I think you are. Speaking of bombs, Sorin Vengeful Bloodlord definitely feels like a bomb here. Now, he gives your creatures lifelink, but he does it in a different way than our commander, so I don't think it's too much overlap. He does a little bit of pinging, which isn't ideal. You're really using his +2 just to gain his loyalty. But the main reason we are using him is that he has a very, very good reanimation ability. He already starts with 4 counters, so you can reanimate a creature up to 4 mana. Most likely you're going to reanimate something smaller. There's a lot of good hits from Dark Confidant to Mentor of the Meek, Midnight Reaper, at 4 mana Cryptghast, a lot of cards you'll be very happy to. But the second you uptick once, all of a sudden, every creature in your deck can be reanimated excuse me, by Sorin on the next turn. And that's really, really good. I really like that. It's a form of delayed reanimation that threatens to reanimate everything from your deck. Get extra triggers, get extra, if there's ETBs in here, a lot of extra, I don't think there are a lot of ETBs actually. But rebuying cards so you can stack them to Priest of Forgotten Gods, all that again and again. I think you'll be very, very happy there. Then let's go back to Sacrifice. Let's look at the cards I wanted to suggest for token generation. Hunted Witness, I think, is very easy sub-in for Thrall Parasite. Very clean card that blocks really well or sacrifices twice. You'd be very happy with that if you have Cruel Celebrant. This creature by itself does 2 damage. And I guess maybe that's the idea I'd want to put ahead. If you have Cruel Celebrant out and this card, and both Hunted Witness and the Soldier token die, you've drained the board for 2. Whereas Thrall Parasite requires you to play Thrall Parasite, have 2 different spells, and each time an additional mana to do the same thing. So on terms of like saving mana, playing to the board, being able to block an attack, I believe Hunted Witness in the long run is going to do a lot better. Likewise, at 2 mana, a very, very playable card is Lazotep Reaver, because Lazotep Reaver comes in with 2 bodies. I think people underestimate the ability of a 2 mana card that comes in right away with 2 bodies. It might just feel like you're putting a 2/3 on the board, but that's not the case. The combination of these 2 cards together or the card and the token is just really, really good. Immediately you have blockers, immediately you have sacrifice targets, and if you ever reanimate the Reaver, getting 2 more creatures again is rather, rather good. Another ability that I think is noticeably missing in your deck is Afterlife. And Afterlife just works really, really well with Teysa. I believe they come from the same set. They're both from Allegiance. Let's see. Yes. No. Is that War? Allegiance. What is the... Yes, they both come from Allegiance. I had to remember the set symbol. Now, I will say, without a doubt, Ministrant of Obligation is the best Afterlife card. A 3 mana 2/1 that when he dies gets 2 1/1s. And then, of course, and I didn't mention this about Hunted Witness, but both of these, when they die with Teysa out, they will trigger twice and make double the tokens. Ministrant of Obligation, of course, threatens to make 4 1/1 flying white-black spirit creatures. And if you haven't played with these kind of creatures, with especially the creature tokens of white-black, like flying spirit tokens, you will underestimate how powerful this is. They usually can't be blocked. There's usually at least one opponent that doesn't have sufficient flyers, or flyers that can't block profitably with 1/1s, which is really funny, but it does happen. Or you leave them on defense and they represent quite a bit of time because each spirit token can block once, so you have 4 turns. or 2 turns, or they, you can pile them together with themselves or other creatures to block very profitably against a very big creature. So this card is just by itself just really, really strong in your deck. Cruel Celebrant out. This represents 3 triggers, right? Once again, comparing it to, let's say, the Extort Defender creature, which I don't think we even need the Basilica Guards. We don't even need to make this comparison, do we? Basilica Cards requires 3 additional mana and 3 additional spells, to get the same drain, whereas Minister of Obligation in the meantime is attacking and doing whatever you want, blocking, attacking, being sacrificed, all that. So very, very nice card. Now there's other Afterlife cards. I noticed one of them at least is down here. Where are we at? Imperious Oligarch. She's a 2/1 with Afterlife 1. I don't like this as much. My theme is that if she's fine. She's fine if you want the second Afterlife ability, or even if you'd like, there's the 4 mana Mythic Angel, which I would use as my second Afterlife because she also has Afterlife 2, and I do very much like the Afterlife 2. I think it enables for the cards to kind of pull their weight a little more. But Imperious Oligarch and the other weaker Afterlife creatures are also completely playable. I'll leave that to you to kind of decide to what degree you want to use an ability like that. I think it's rather good, but you don't need to put too much in there. Okay, I got one more card that I think is really, really... Actually, let's put 2 more cards here that are strong, and then we'll have some countering cards. Kaya's Ghost Form is just one of the strongest 1 mana cards. I think you're just going to be really, really happy to just cast this on your commander and leave it there. This is a protection card. We don't have access to a lot of protection in these colors, and this protects from exile or dies, which are the common ways you're going to lose creatures. Think, once again, board clears, Merciless Eviction. There are some good exile effects in this set. I really recommend Kaya's Ghost Form to protect either your either your commander, or put it on Dark Confidant, and you'll be very, very happy. And then this is just a little more card advantage. Underworld Connections comes from Ravnica. Just very easy. Put it on a land. That land now can be tapped for basically 1 mana draw card each turn. It's not ideal. It's not the best. But you'll never be too sad to have it because it is card advantage very, very quickly. It will, especially in a set like this where people can't combo infinitely really easily, you will get your 3 mana's worth. And more mana, I guess the mana you're tapping, the land you're tapping each time, you will get your value out of it. All right, so coming to cards that I think can really help up in this set to kind of mess with our opponents. I noticed you're playing Suppression Field. That's something that crossed my mind, so I'm glad you're playing it. This does cut away from certain cards that we could play, such as down here, you have suggested where Cartel Aristocrat, which is an old favorite of mine because this is close to when I started in Magic. Always funny that Dimmer is not on this pyramid over here. There might be some lore reasons for it, but I do think maybe the artist forgot. But this is, I believe, one of our best sack outlets that is on an activated ability. And if you've watched any of my videos, you know I really, really do like having instant speed, no-cost sack outlets. So Cartel Aristocrat is really, really good here. And I think generally that's the only one that really has an activated ability outside of where's the Regenerate on Dimmer House Guard. And Extort is not an activated ability. I guess Thrall Parasite's other ability is. And I guess Priest of the Forgotten Gods, which is your other sack outlet. So Suppression Field isn't incredibly free. It does hit some of the strongest cards in our deck, but those strongest cards are like 2 cards, one of which is in your maybe pile. So I think that's fine. Definitely play this. Definitely see if it does anything. If Suppression Field doesn't do anything, sub it out rather quickly, because if it's not shutting down your opponent's plans, like that they're only things that tap for stuff or activate are mana dorks, for example, then this is going to be affecting you more than your opponents. But since we can't play Rip, a nice hate card that I really like, let's do this one, that will affect opponents' graveyards is Kaya Orzhov Usurper. Very much obviously in color, in theme. This commander is rather good in this kind of set. Now here's the thing. I said commander, sorry. Planeswalkers are rather weak in commander most of the time because they are vulnerable to damage outside, like instead of enchantments, like instead of Rip, you know, Rest in Peace just is the permanent solution. Kaya will slowly tick down your opponent's graveyards. However, you have the means to block, right? You can produce tokens, you can produce creatures that you don't mind dying. You can be defensive when Kaya's up and still benefit from it. So Kaya's +1 is kind of like a really slow drain on your opponent's graveyards, and I think that's good enough, right? If there's a black-green player that's using their graveyard, using Dredge, using I can't remember the mechanic where they scavenge, that's what it was, using scavenge, using undergrowth, what have you, you can start pressuring their graveyard, which will, you know, let you hit key targets and slowly cut down on the number of creatures they have in there. If one of your opponents is in red-blue with Jumpstart, well, you can just target those Jumpstart cards and then move on to another opponent not long after. Likewise, I don't think there's many like the black-white cards, but you can kind of push down on your black-white opponents on creatures they might want to reanimate, so on and so forth. Also, the 2 life is something. It's not great, but it's something. Now, the -1 she has to exile a creature that's a permanent that's 1 mana or less. There's not a lot of targets when it comes down to key 1 mana targets, but I think you should just use the fact that she can, like, I mean, for what it's worth, you can get rid of other Kaya's ghost forms, which you might see in black. But I think much more importantly, you can use this to take out tokens. Some of Selesnya's tokens are 5/5 worms, and using her to take out a 5/5 is rather good, because otherwise, especially with the 5/5s with trample, it's hard to chump them for a very long time. So having Kaya to be able to cleanly remove them, keeping your Planeswalker for another turn is really good. And then obviously her ultimate is actually incredibly strong in a format like this. Remember, exile is very available to all of our opponents, especially if they're in white in any way, right? But also if you think like Jumpstart, you think like, I'm trying to think that there has to be another one that I'm forgetting, but there's other exile abilities that your opponents are going to have their own cards in exile, and you know, from their opponents or themselves, and Kaya can really take out an opponent quickly that way. Granted, you just basically have been using her as a +1 during that time, but it's great. Anyways, really nice support card, I think is worth playing. Some soft hate on your opponents. Speaking of Kaya, here's another one with her in it, with our girl Teysa, and that's Ethereal Absolution. And I don't think... Yes, it's here too. So, you were considering this yourself. I think by itself, this is possibly one of the best bombs you can play. When we look at our deck, and we think of Selesnya, and we think of other green decks and white decks, there are a lot of X1s in the format. And so already the creature your opponents control get -1/-1 is already really good. Adding in your creatures getting stronger, already good. If you've played with Elish Norn, you know how much that divide is very valuable. But then when we add the activated ability, which I guess is another reason to maybe think about Suppression Field, of being able to just generate, you know, 2/2s out of your opponent's graveyard, well, at that point, we are getting really far ahead. So Ethereal Absolution is a really clean card. Just play it. You can even just forget about it for a while and just continue to, power up your board while your opponents scramble to deal with it. And so, with that in mind, I think this is just really good. But this is just another card to kind of remind that, like, this is what I mean, that the enchantments and artifacts are some of the strongest cards. Like Ethereal Absolution is so, so good. You definitely need cards like Mortify. And there's an interesting card here that I think works very well to kind of push down on these kind of, like, we don't have Generous Gift, right? We have to, destroying any kind of permanent is kind of tough. And Soul Tithe has an interesting, Soul Tithe has an interesting method of dealing with any kind of permanent. And so with that in mind, Soul Tithe comes in, you enchant a non-land permanent, and they have to pay the mana cost of that non-land permanent over and over and over again. So this, if we once again we look through here, you think of Ethereal Absolution, you think of Bolas's Citadel, you think of Parhelion, you think of, you know, Grave Betrayal is another really good one, right? Liliana, Dreadhorde General. All of these cards are really, really good to Soul Tithe because it's basically forcing your opponent to completely commit to keeping that permanent forever. Or they have to let that go. And then they lose the permanent, and 2 mana destroy any permanent is rather, rather good. It can be clunky. There's certain points in the game that you're just going to be unhappy seeing this, and certain opponents are just going to be kind of immune to Soul Tithe if they ramp really hard, if they're in green, you know, if they don't play really big creatures, if they're like low mana Rakdos. You're going to be pretty happy. Like, it's going to be pretty miserable to have this card. But like, even then, I just find that so hard to believe. If we went, for example, let's see if we can do this real fast. If I went down here and we go to sets, there we go. You choose blocks, we'll go Guilds of Ravnica, we'll go Return to Ravnica, and we'll go Ravnica. And I'm going to put mana value greater than 6. And we're going to say not creatures. Actually, I should have said permanent as well. Can you not just put permanent? Let's put instant, sorcery, and say not either of those. Okay. Looking at these, oh, there's less than I thought. Let's say 5 or greater. Yes, there we go. Bolas's Citadel, Captive Audience, Dreadbridge Chant, Debtor's Knell, Death's Presence. These are Dovescape even, Ethereal Absolution. These are all Godfarer's Statue. Like, I can name so many of these. Grave Betrayal. Like, these are some of the strongest cards, Mirror March for sure, that your opponents are going to want to put into play. Thousand Year Storm, Ugin, and... Okay, I didn't know Tezzeret. Yeah, of course, because he was supplemental. Yeah, Tezzeret's in there too. These are real, even Guild Feud to an extent. These cards are really, really strong and swing the game really, really quickly into the direction of the player playing it. Conjured Currency is very, very funny, but I don't expect people to play that. And you want to be able to immediately deal with these kind of cards. Collective Blessing, even, like that's such a big boost, right? They're going to play these, and yeah, you might be like, well, they also have the Primordials and things like that. Yeah, but like, the Primordials are big creatures. Everyone brings creature removal. But the really, really strong stuff is going to be the stuff that people can't deal with, right? If Bolas's Citadel comes out and it's unanswered for a turn or two, the game is pretty much over if they can get a lot of casts out. Likewise, Godfarer's Statue, just, you know, surviving for a round, forcing your all the other players to be taxed for every single turn, like every single spell they cast, is already putting you so far ahead that, you know, it's just really, really hard to get back from. Even Gleam of Battle is, I think, good enough. Like, these cards are just so strong. So we definitely need ways to kind of deal with them. And so I guess that's what I'll end with. That if there was anything else to add in, any kind of O-ring effect, any kind of like, by that I mean an enchantment that removes any other enchantment as long as that enchantment you played is on the battlefield, that's Oblivion Ring, Oblivion Ring, you're going to be really happy with that effect because it's going to stop so many very, very powerful abilities. And that's not Ravnica. Okay. I had, for some reason in my mind, Back to Nature wasn't Ravnica. I was going to say, that's really strong. But yes. All right. So that's going to be kind of the closing point on my suggestions. I know I suggested a lot of cards, and you were looking for cuts. I'm always a bad person like that. I do generally like the cards in this deck. I think some of them, like if we're going to be real strict, I'll go through this again. I think a lot of the extort cards outside of some of the strongest ones can be cut really easily. I think a lot of the high mana clunky cards like Storm Herd or Parhelion can be cut really easily because they don't really work with what we're doing here. And if they do, they can be replaced by, you know, Finale of Glory pretty easily. Then a few cards here and there from Beckon Apparition, Justicars, I can never pronounce this word. This portal can be removed pretty easily, and I think those are the main ones. Arrest can be cut, Sky Tether can be cut, Suppression Field should be, you know, we should keep an eye on it. It is kind of a card that's tough because it might hurt you more than your opponents. And then I think if you can add any kind of card, Bontu, Sorin, a few cards that create more tokens like Afterlife, Ministrant of Obligation, I would recommend quite a bit. After which I would definitely recommend Ethereal Absolution and Soul Tithe. And then Let Your Heart Go Wild. This sounds like a really fun idea. I really do like it. I love to hear what the other players are playing because it would give me an idea of what the meta would be like. And I think it would be rather cool to do it. And I would really like to hear how those games go. Am I right in my assumption that everyone is bringing Rest in Peace and Smothering Tithe style effects? You know, cards that are incredibly powerful in their colors that hate on your opponent's cards rather cleanly. Or is everyone just playing flavor? Because that's the thing, is everyone's playing flavor, then maybe you can just get away with playing a lot of the extort abilities at low cost. But maybe it's just because I know my my play group, and I know if this is Ravnica, people are bringing in some strong cards. I hope this video was helpful to you. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck or any deck, there's a link in the video description down below. And if you would like to support the deck, support the channel like Ravnica did, and bring your deck to the top of the list, you can do so in that description down below. And finally, like, comment, subscribe, you know the whole deal. Thank you so much, Ravnica. I always appreciate you sending your decks our way and supporting the channel. I hope you have a lot of fun. This seems like a really fun kind of, you know, deck building restriction or flavor restriction to have and play with your friends with. So I'm really excited to hear about it, and obviously very happy that you've picked the correct guild. All right, good luck.